Some grief does not weep where people can see it. Some grief puts on boots before daylight, throws open a barn door, and makes every living thing flinch from the sound. Folks will call a man mad when they are too tired to ask what broke him. But there are women in this world who can hear sorrow under anger the way they hear rain coming before the clouds gather. This is the memory of one such woman, and the ranch that learned to breathe again because she stayed. Miriam Lawson was carrying a pail of pump water across the muddy yard of the Carver Ranch when a saddle came flying out of the barn door and struck the woodpile hard enough to scatter kindling at her feet. The pail jerked in her hand, cold water slapped over her skirt and darkened the hem clear to her boots. A red leather bridle, cracked and silver buckled, followed next, flung with such fury it caught on a fence post and swung there like a wounded bird. Inside the barn a horse screamed. Then came Ezra Carver's voice. "I told you not that one." Miriam stood in the gray Idaho morning, the mountains still blue with leftover snow above the pines, and watched the man they called the Mad Rancher stumble into view with both fists clenched and his hat pushed low. He was broad-shouldered, unshaven, and breathing like he had run miles instead of crossed a barn floor. A hired boy no older than 16 backed away from him with a brush in his trembling hand. "I only meant to clean her stall, Mr. Carver," the boy stammered. Ezra looked at the stall behind him, then at the red bridle hanging on the post. For one hard second, Miriam thought he might strike the boy. The whole yard held its breath, the hens under the wash line, the bay gelding tied near the pump, even the old dog lying beneath the porch. But Ezra's hand did not rise. It dropped. His face changed so quickly that anyone not looking might have missed it. The anger cracked open, and something raw and frightened showed underneath. His mouth moved around words that did not come. Then he turned from them all and put one hand against the barn wall, as if the boards were the only thing keeping him upright. Miriam set the pail down in the mud. The boy bolted past her toward the bunkhouse. The hens scattered. The bridle rocked in the wind. Ezra said, low and broken, "Nobody touches Rose things. Before we go farther, tell me where you are listening from tonight. If this story finds a tender place in you, give it a like, share it with someone who loves old frontier tales, and subscribe so more quiet hearts can gather here." Now let us return to Miriam and the Carver Ranch. Miriam did not move toward him at first. She had learned early that wounded creatures could bite with no warning, and men were not so different from horses in that way. She had been hired 3 days before by Caleb Pike, Ezra's foreman, who met her at the stage road with a wagon, a flour sack, and an apology already sitting behind his eyes. It ain't a pleasant place, Caleb had told her, clucking the mule forward, but it pays honest, $10 a month, room, meals, and no one will trouble you if you keep your head down. "And, Mr. Carver?" Miriam had asked. Caleb had looked toward the distant roofs pressed beneath the mountain shoulder. How trouble anything that breathes too close? Folks in Eagle Bend called Ezra Carver mad, though not always to his face. They said he had once been the finest cattleman in 3 valleys, a man who could judge a horse by the shape of its ears, and lay a fence line straighter than a surveyor. They said his wife had been pretty, merry, and soft-handed, with a laugh that rang from the church steps to the livery. They said after she died, something in him took the same road she did and never came back. Miriam had heard all of that in town before accepting the work. She had accepted it anyway. A woman who had buried her father in poor ground, watched her brothers scatter after railroad wages, and kept house for strangers from Kansas to Oregon, did not scare easy. She was 30 years old, plain by some mouths, steady by better ones, and more useful than delicate. She could bake bread from poor flour, stitch a torn sleeve so it held another season, quiet a fevered child, dress a cut, milk a kicking cow, mend a gate, split kindling if the axe was sharp, and keep accounts better than many men who laughed at her spectacles. What she could not do was abide a house surrendering to sorrow, and the Carver place had surrendered. The first morning, Miriam had found the kitchen cold, though the sun was already against the east window. Ash lay deep in the stove. The pump handle squealed. The bread box was empty except for a crust so hard she could have used it to prop a door. Laundry hung stiff behind the house, forgotten through 2 rains. In the garden last year's bean poles leaned like old bones, and weeds had strangled the onion rows. Chickens scratched beneath the porch because no one had fixed the coop latch. The corral rails sagged where a gray mare had rubbed them half loose. Inside, room sat untouched beneath dust. A woman's shawl remained on a chair near the parlor window, faded blue wool with a frayed fringe. A small sewing basket stood beside it, still holding a needle thrust through a scrap of white cotton. On the mantel, turned slightly away from the room, was a framed tintype of a woman with smiling eyes and one hand resting over the swell of pregnancy. Miriam had not touched the shawl. She had cleaned around it. Now, on that 3rd morning, she stood between the water pump and the barn, watching Ezra Carver's shoulders rise and fall as he leaned into the boards. The red bridle creaked against the fence post. Miriam wiped her wet hand down her skirt. Then she crossed the yard, slow enough for him to hear her coming. "Mr. Carver." He did not turn. The boy meant no harm. Ezra laughed once, but it was a sound without humor. "They never do." A gust came down from the mountain, carrying pine coal and the sharp smell of horse sweat. Miriam saw then that his knuckles were torn, not from striking the boy, from gripping something too hard. Maybe the stall gate, maybe memory itself. She reached for the bridle. "Leave it," he snapped. Her hand stopped in the air. He turned on her then, eyes dark with sleeplessness. "I said leave it." Miriam held his gaze. Her heart struck once hard against her ribs, but her voice remained level. "It will warp in the weather. Let it. Leather does not know grief, Mr. Carver. It only knows neglect." The words settled between them, bold as a slap, though she had not meant them cruelly. Ezra stared at her. His jaw worked. For a moment the old dog beneath the porch lifted his head, as if waiting to see whether she too would run. Ezra stepped closer. Miriam did not back away. Then his face shuddered. He took the bridle from the post, not gently, but not carelessly either. His thumb passed once over the silver buckle, and all the anger drained so fast, Miriam felt ashamed to have seen it. "My wife liked red," he said. It was not an explanation. It was barely a sentence. Miriam lowered her eyes. "Then it ought to be kept oiled." He looked at her as if she had answered a question he had not known how to ask. From the bunkhouse window the hired boy watched. Caleb Pike stood by the wagon's shed with an axe in one hand and worry in the set of his mouth. No one spoke. Ezra turned and went back into the barn, carrying the bridle against his chest. Miriam picked up the pail, though half the water was gone, and returned to the pump. That evening supper was beans, fried potatoes, and biscuits browned on top, but soft beneath. Miriam had found salt pork in the smokehouse, flour in a barrel, and dried apples in a tin. She set 3 places at the kitchen table, though Caleb had told her Ezra usually ate wherever he happened to be. Sometimes not until midnight, sometimes not at all. The kitchen looked different after 3 days of her hands. Not cheerful yet. Cheer would have been an insult, but the stove shone black again. The floor had been scrubbed. A cracked blue pitcher held wild yellow flowers she had picked near the creek. Clean dish towels hung from pegs. Coffee kept warm at the back of the stove, because a home without coffee ready felt like a body with no pulse. Ezra came in after dark. He stopped just inside the door, rain shining on his coat and hat brim. His eyes moved from the swept floor to the table, to the lamp Miriam had trimmed, then to the pitcher of flowers. "What's that?" he asked. "Rabbit brush? I know what it is." "Then why ask?" Caleb coughed into his cup. Ezra's mouth tightened, but he took off his hat. He hung it on the peg nearest the door, then noticed the peg had been repaired. Miriam had found it loose that afternoon and tightened it with a wedge of pine. He sat. Miriam served him without hovering. She had cooked for men who mistook kindness for permission, and for men who mistook silence for judgment. Ezra seemed to take everything as a challenge, even biscuits. He broke one open. Steam rose. For a long while he did not eat. His gaze had gone to the parlor doorway, where the blue shawl was just visible in the dim room beyond. Caleb said, "South fence needs seeing to tomorrow." Elk pushed near half a rail down. Ezra dipped his spoon into the beans. "Then see to it. With Tom gone, I could use. Tom can keep gone. He's 16. He touched her stall." Miriam poured coffee. "He was asked to work and did work. If every hand is sent off for touching a memory, you'll be ranching with ghosts." Caleb froze. Ezra looked up slowly. Miriam set the coffee pot down. Her hands were steady, though her stomach was not. "You hired me to help. I cannot help if I am expected to pretend dirt is sacred and boys are villains. I did not hire you. No, but your money will pay me." His eyes narrowed, but she saw again what she had seen in the barn. The anger came first, trained and ready. Behind it, grief stood barefoot in the cold. Ezra pushed his plate away. "I don't need another woman arranging my house." Miriam picked up his untouched plate. "Then eat before I arrange the beans into the slop bucket." Caleb's eyes dropped hard to his cup. A strange silence followed. Then Ezra, to Miriam's surprise, pulled the plate back and ate. Not much, but enough. The next morning, the ranch woke to frost silvering the pump handle. Miriam wrapped her shawl tight and coaxed the stove alive before daylight. She mixed dough by lamplight, her fingers disappearing into flour, while the house creaked in the cold. Outside, Ezra's boots crossed the porch earlier than any other man's. He moved like someone chased by sleep. By sunup, Miriam had fed the hens, found 6 eggs behind an overturned crate, scrubbed the water trough, and set a torn flowers sack aside for patching. She carried ashes out and saw Ezra in the corral working the gray mare. He did not shout that morning. That was the first change. The mare tossed her head, nervous from too many hard voices. Ezra stood in the center of the corral with a rope loose in one hand, his coat open despite the cold. He spoke low, not soft exactly, but low enough that the ma's ears flicked toward him. "That's it," he murmured. "Easy now." Miriam paused by the ash heap, watching. His hand, when he reached, was careful. It made the barn scene harder to understand and easier too. Anger was not the whole of him. It was only the door he slammed before anyone could enter. Later that day, Miriam mended the chicken coop, while Caleb and the boy, Tom, rode the south fence. Ezra had not apologized for frightening Tom, but he had not forbidden Caleb from taking him back either. In Ezra Carver, that seemed near enough to surrender. The coop latch was bent. Miriam found a hammer in the tool shed and a nail keg beneath a bench. The shed had once been orderly, she could tell. Hooks marked places where saws and bridles belonged. Chalk labels remained on drawers. Now tools lay scattered as though a storm had blown through and never left. She was fitting the latch when Ezra came around the corner carrying a coil of wire. "That hinge wants replacing." Miriam did not look up. "Ah, yes. You'll split the wood driving that nail, not if I tap it first." "It's old pine." "So am I, nearly." He made a sound that might have been annoyance. "You're not old. For a heinous carpenter, I am ancient." He stood there longer than needed. She tapped the nail lightly, then drove it clean. The latch held. Ezra's gaze moved over her work. "Who taught you that?" "My father. He believed every daughter should know how to mend what her brothers broke." "He sounds practical." "He was poor. Poor people call necessity by prettier names." Ezra looked away toward the barn. Rose never had to do such work. Miriam gathered the extra nails into her palm. Perhaps she would have liked knowing how. His face tightened, and Miriam thought she had gone too far. But he only set the coil of wire on the stump near her. "For the garden fence," he said. "Rabbits'll take anything you plant." Then he walked off. Miriam watched him go, the wire cold and bright in the morning sun. That afternoon she cleared the garden. She pulled dead stalks until her back ached, stacked bean poles, and found a row of stubborn onions beneath the weeds. The soil was dark once turned. Good soil, neglected but not ruined. Nothing ruined, she thought, was ever as ruined as people claimed while they still had hands to work. 2 weeks passed in the slow arithmetic of labor. A woodpile straightened. Laundry came down, washed again, and hung clean. The pump handle was greased. The hens returned to their coop and began laying in proper boxes. Caleb patched the south fence with Tom beside him, and Ezra rode out at dawn to check cattle in the high meadow, coming back with mud to his knees and silence in his mouth. Miriam learned the ranch by its sounds. The wind worried the eaves before snow. The third porch board complained under heavy boots. The kitchen window rattled unless wedged with folded paper. One brown hen sang after laying, louder than the rooster. At night, Ezra sometimes crossed the hallway and stopped before the closed bedroom at the end, the one no one entered. Miriam would hear the pause, the floorboard, the long absence of movement. Then he would return to his room without opening the door. She did not ask. Some doors required more than a key. The first town trouble came on a Saturday when Caleb drove Miriam to Eagle Bend for sugar, lamp oil, and seed. Ezra had written a list in blunt pencil and left money beneath a coffee tin, not handed it to her, not spoken of trust, just left it where her hand would find it. Eagle Bend sat in a folded valley where the stage road crossed a creek. The general store smelled of coffee beans, leather, molasses, and dust worn by the stove. 2 women near the calico bolts stopped speaking when Miriam entered. Mr. Hadley, the storekeeper, peered over his spectacles. "You're the new woman out at Carver's." Miriam set her basket on the counter. "I am Miriam Lawson." His eyes flicked over her plain dress, work rough hands, and the list she carried. "Housekeeper, hired help." One of the women whispered, not quietly enough. "Brave or desperate," the other replied. "Same thing, taking wages from a madman." Miriam unfolded Ezra's list. Her ears burned, but she kept her voice even. 20 pounds flour, 2 sugar, lamp oil, yeast cakes if you have them, an onion seed. Hadley leaned his elbows on the counter. "He paying cash?" Miriam laid coins down. "That ranch owes half this valley. It appears not to owe you for flour." The whispering women went still. Hadley's mouth pinched. No offense meant. Fenna should have been made. She gathered the parcels herself while Hadley wrapped the seed. At the door, one of the women said, "You best be careful, Miss Lawson. Rose Carver was a sweet thing, and look what that house did to her." Miriam turned. "What did it do?" The woman blinked. "Well, she died there." "No," Miriam said. "Death came there. That is not the same as blame. She left before her courage could thin." Caleb, waiting by the wagon, saw her face and said nothing. Kindness sometimes knew when to keep quiet. He loaded the flour, clicked to the mule, and took the road out of town. Half a mile later, Miriam saw Ezra on horseback at the ridge above the creek. He had heard, or enough of it. He sat still as stone while the wagon approached. His eyes were on Miriam, not Caleb. At the ranch, he helped unload without a word. When Miriam reached for the seed packets, his hand closed over them first. "What did Hadley say?" He asked. "If you were paying cash." "What did the women say?" Miriam looked at him. Town women often talk to hear proof they exist. His mouth almost moved. "Tell me." She could have softened it. She could have lied, but lies build weak floors. They called you mad. His hand tightened around the onion seed. "And you?" "I bought flour." "That ain't an answer." "It is the only one that matters today." He stared at her for a long moment. Then he held out the seed packets. "You don't owe me defending." "No," Miriam said. "I owe myself the truth." That evening, she found a small sack of coffee on the kitchen table. Not the bitter kind Ezra bought cheap from Hadley, but good beans from the freight office, dark and fragrant. No note, no thanks, just coffee. She ground some the next morning before dawn. When Ezra came in from the barn, he stopped at the smell. "What's this?" "Coffee." "I know coffee." "Then why ask?" This time, the corner of his mouth gave the smallest, briefest lift before he hid it in the cup. Spring crept into the Idaho mountains reluctantly, as though suspicious of warmth. Snow withdrew from the lower slopes. Creek water ran louder. The yard became mud, then rutted earth, then grass in thin green stitches along the fence. Miriam planted onions, beans, and peas inside the newly wired garden fence. She set marigold seeds near the gate because her mother had sworn they kept pests away, though Miriam suspected they only kept hope visible. Ezra watched her from a distance until one afternoon he came with a hoe. "You're planting too close." "I am planting for a kitchen, not a county fair. Beans need room, so do people." "Yet here we are." He looked at the rows, rose-planted flowers. Miriam pressed a seed into the soil. "Where?" He pointed toward the sunny strip beneath the parlor window. "Sweet peas, hollyhocks, some yellow thing I never recalled the name of. Calendula, maybe you could plant them again." His expression closed. "No." Miriam brushed soil from her fingers. "I will." His eyes sharpened. "Not in her place," Miriam said quietly. In the dirt for a moment, the wind moved between them, carrying the smell of tawed earth and horses. Ezra looked toward the parlor window. The blue shawl was not visible from outside, but Miriam felt him seeing it all the same. "Do what you want," he said. So she did. She planted sweet peas beneath the parlor window and hollyhocks near the porch, though the ground there was hard and full of pebbles. Ezra said nothing when he saw, but 2 days later, the pebbles had been raked out, and a bucket of compost stood nearby. Miriam smiled only after she was alone. The quiet between them did not become easy all at once. It changed by spoonfuls. Ezra stopped leaving muddy boots in the kitchen doorway and began setting them on the porch. Miriam began keeping a heel of bread wrapped for him when he came in late. He complained once that she boiled coffee too strong. The next morning, he drank 2 cups. She found his torn work shirt in the wash and patched the sleeve. He wore it without mention, though his tongue passed over the stitching while he listened to Caleb report on a broken culvert. Tom, the boy Ezra had frightened, returned to the barn more often. At first he went pale whenever Ezra came near. Then one morning Ezra handed him a curry comb and said, "Not that stall. Start with the gelding." Tom nodded. It was not an apology, but his hands steadied. There were no children in the Carver house, though one had nearly come. Miriam learned that not from Ezra, but from a small carved cradle stored in the loft above the washroom. She found it on a rainy afternoon while searching for canning jars. The loft smelled of dust cedar and old mouse nests. Beneath a canvas tarp sat the cradle, unfinished on one side, its rockers smooth and curved, its headboard carved with tiny roses. A folded baby quilt lay inside, yellow and white, untouched by use. Miriam stood there in the dimness with one hand at her throat. Behind her, the ladder creaked. "Come down," Ezra said. She turned. His face below was white with fury. "I was looking for jars. You found none up there." "No, come down." Miriam climbed carefully, her skirt brushing dust from the rungs. When she reached the floor, Ezra stepped back as if afraid her nearness would make him do something unforgivable. "That loft is not your concern." "I understand." "You understand nothing." Miriam looked up at him. Rain ticked against the washroom roof. Somewhere in the kitchen, the stove lid rattled as heat shifted. "No," she said. "Not nothing." His eyes flashed. "Do not put your pity on me. I have no wish to. Every woman in town had pity enough. Brought pies, stood in my parlor, whispered how God had plans. Plans? He laughed harshly. Rose bled to death in that room, while Doc Hensley rode through a storm and got here too late. The child never cried. There. Now you know the thing everyone circles like buzzards. Miriam did not look away. Ezra's breath came hard. Say something useful, Miss Lawson. You're good at that. She thought of the cradle above them, of the carved roses, of a man's hand making a bed for a child who never slept. At last she said, I am sorry the house kept the cradle when it could not keep them. His face broke. Not much, just enough. He turned away, one hand covering his eyes. His shoulders did not shake. He made no sound, but grief filled that washroom until Miriam could hardly breathe around it. She did not touch him. She only stood there with the rain on the roof and let silence do what words would have spoiled. After that day, Ezra was worse for nearly a week. He snapped at Caleb over feed counts, cursed a broken harness, and rode out before breakfast. Once, when Miriam asked whether he wanted stew kept warm, he said, I want to be left alone in my own house. She answered, Then you should not have hired people to keep it standing. He slammed the door. That night he did not come to supper. Miriam left a bowl covered on the stove anyway. In the morning, it was empty and washed. The worst of spring came with rain, not gentle rain, but hard mountain weather that turned the creek brown and the yard to sucking mud. The roof over the back pantry began to leak. Miriam put pots beneath the drips and told Caleb the shingles needed replacing before flour spoiled. Caleb rubbed his jaw. Ezra knows. Knowing is not mending. He won't climb that side since the accident. What accident? Caleb looked toward the barn. Roof gave under him 2 years back. Rose was alive then. He broke 2 ribs. She fussed so hard he laughed for 3 days. After she died, he let that corner go. Miriam studied the drip falling into the pot. Plink, plink, plink. The next morning she dragged a ladder from the shed. Tom found her first. Miss Lawson, you ain't going up there. I have climbed worse. You slipped. Then hold the ladder. His eyes widened. Mr. Carver will skin me. He can wait until after the flour is safe. She had tied her skirt at the knees and carried a hammer tucked in her apron. When Ezra rode into the yard, he rained so hard the gelding tossed its head. What in God's name are you doing? Miriam, halfway up the ladder, looked down. Protecting your pantry. Get down, gladly. Once the shingle is fixed, that roof won't hold. Then, it should have been repaired while both of us stood on the ground. Ezra swung down from the saddle. Miriam. It was the first time he had used her Christian name. She felt it more than she wished. His voice changed when he said it again. Miriam, come down. She looked at him. Rain misted in his hair and clung to the dark stubble along his jaw. Beneath the anger she saw fear, plain as candlelight. Not for the roof, for the falling, for the losing. She climbed down. Ezra took the hammer from her hand. Their fingers touched. He held on half a breath too long, then let go. I'll do it, he said. Caleb came from the barn. Ezra, I said, I'll do it. He climbed slowly. Twice he stopped, one hand gripping the rung until his knuckles whitened. Miriam stood at the bottom, holding the ladder steady. Rain dampened her hair beneath her bonnet and slid cold down her collar. You need not prove anything, she said. Ezra did not look down. A man should keep weather off his own house. A man is allowed help. He laughed under his breath. That your great wisdom. No, that is simple physics. He climbed higher. The roof did not give. The shingle came loose stubbornly, but he fixed it, hammered new wood in place, and climbed down with his face gray and his breath tight. When his boots touched mud, he staggered once. Miriam caught his sleeve. He looked at her hand on him. She let go. That night, he came to supper washed, shaved, and wearing the patched shirt Miriam had made chicken and dumplings. using one of the older hens that had stopped laying. Tom ate like a starving wolf until Caleb told him to breathe between bites. Ezra sat across from Miriam. The lamplight softened the hard lines of his face. After a long while, he said, "Roof's fixed." Miriam ladled gravy over Caleb's plate. "So it is. Floor's safe?" "Yes." Ezra looked at her. "Thank you for not climbing." She met his eyes. "Thank you for not falling." Tom glanced between them, then bent quickly over his food. Outside, the rain continued, but the pantry stayed dry. By early summer, the ranch began to look less like a place waiting for judgment. The garden rose green behind its wire fence. Hens scratched in the yard and returned home at dusk. The woodpile stood stacked beneath a slanted cover Ezra and Tom built from scrap boards. Laundry snapped clean on the line. The corral gate swung straight after Caleb rehung it. Miriam scrubbed the parlor windows and beat dust from curtains she found folded in a trunk. She did not move Rose's shawl, but she washed the chair beneath it, polished the small table, and set fresh sweet peas in a jar on the sill. Ezra noticed. He stood in the parlor doorway one evening while Miriam trimmed lamp wicks. "You changed the curtains." "I washed the curtains." "They look changed. Most things do when clean." His gaze went to the shawl. "You left it." "Yes. Why?" "It was not mine to move." He stepped into the room. Miriam remained still. He picked up the shawl slowly, almost awkwardly, as though touching it might wake the past. "She wore this the night I brought her here," he said. "Thought the house was too plain. Said blue would teach it manners." Miriam smiled faintly. "Did it, for a while?" He held the shawl in both hands. The room seemed to narrow around him. "I don't remember her voice right anymore," he said. There it was, the quiet night conversation, though the sun had not fully set. The confession beneath the confession. Miriam lowered the wick. "Fat frightens you." His tongue rubbed a frayed edge. "If I lose that, what kind of husband was I?" The living forget sounds. It is a mercy and a punishment both. He looked at her then. "Who did you lose?" "My mother first, then my father, then the notion that good work always earns a safe place." His eyes stayed on her face. She had not meant to say so much. Her past was not hidden, only folded small. Born in Missouri, raised in hard years, eldest daughter in a house where money left faster than it came. She had nursed her mother through lung fever, buried her father after a wagon accident, and worked in homes where she was expected to be grateful for a mattress near the kitchen. There had been a man once too, a schoolteacher with clean cuffs and clever words, who liked her steadiness until he found a merchant's daughter with a dowry. Miriam had not loved him deeply enough to break, but she had been humiliated enough to harden. Ezra seemed to hear parts she had not spoken. "What brought you to Idaho?" he asked. "Need. That all?" She looked toward the darkening window. "Need is not small," he nodded once. The next Sunday, Ezra went to church. Miriam had not expected it. Caleb nearly dropped the harness when Ezra came from the house in a black coat brushed clean and boots polished. He had shaved close. His hair was damp and combed. He looked uncomfortable, as if the coat belonged to a man he had once known. Miriam came out wearing her best brown dress, the collar mended with careful stitches. Ezra hitched the wagon himself. In town, people watched them arrive. Of course they did. Gossip was the cheapest entertainment in any settlement. Mrs. Bell from the mercantile leaned toward another woman and whispered behind her glove. Mr. Hadley stood on the store porch, pipe paused halfway to his mouth. Doc Hensley, older now and bent at the shoulders, removed his hat when he saw Ezra. Ezra climbed down, then turned and offered Miriam his hand. It was proper, nothing more, but his fingers were warm, and town eyes sharpened at the sight. Inside the church, the Carver pew sat empty no longer. Ezra stood through hymns without singing. Miriam sang softly beside him. When the preacher spoke about burdens, Ezra stared straight ahead, jaw tight. After service, Mrs. Bell approached with a smile too sweet. "Mr. Carver, How nice to see you among the living." Miriam felt Ezra go still. Mrs. Bell's gaze slid to her. "And Miss Lawson, you must have a remarkable touch with difficult households." Ezra said nothing. Miriam could have defended him. She had done it before. But this was his town, his grief, his name. Ezra removed his hat. "My house has been difficult because I made it so," he said. His voice was rough, but it carried. "Miss Lawson has done honest work where others offered talk. You'll speak of her respectfully or not at all." Mrs. Bell flushed. Hadley, standing nearby, looked down at his boots. Miriam stared at Ezra's profile. No grand speech, no raised voice, just a public fence set straight. On the ride home, the wagon wheels rattled over dry ruts. Neither spoke for nearly 2 miles. At last Miriam said, "You did not have to do that." Ezra kept his eyes on the road. "Yes, I did." The sentence was simple. It stayed with her all day. Summer deepened. Heat gathered in the valley and pine shadows shortened. Cattle moved higher. The men rode long. Miriam canned early peas, dried herbs, patched sheets, and traded eggs for sugar. She learned that Ezra liked apple butter, but pretended not to. Ezra learned that Miriam worked past weariness unless stopped. One evening he found her sitting on the back step, one boot off, rubbing her ankle. "You're limping." "I am resting." "You're limping while resting." I twisted it near the palm. "It is nothing." He crouched before her without asking, and lifted her booted foot onto his knee. Miriam stiffened. "Ezra, you'll make it worse." His hands were careful as he unlaced the boot. Careful like with the gray mare. Careful like with the red bridle. Her stocking was damp with creek water and sweat. Her ankle had begun to swell. He frowned. "That ain't nothing." "I have had worse." "I expect you have." He glanced up. "That don't make it nothing." No one had said such a thing to her before. Not in that tone. Not as if endurance was not proof she needed less care, but proof she deserved more. He wrapped the ankle with a clean strip torn from an old sheet. Miriam watched his bent head, the sun-brown neck above his collar, the scar along one knuckle. "You know bandaging," she said. "Cat'll teach a man. We're taught more." She had not known there had been war. He tied the cloth. "Too tight?" "No, don't lie, a little." He loosened it. For 2 days, Ezra brought water in before she asked. He carried wood to the kitchen box. He told Tom to feed the hens. Miriam protested until he looked at her and said, "Let the ranch serve you once." So she sat more than she wished, and mended a basket of socks near the kitchen window while the house moved around her. It unsettled her. It warmed her. She did not know what to do with being helped without a debt attached. Then the letter came. It arrived folded inside a larger packet from town, addressed in a hand Miriam recognized before she opened it. Clara Lawson, her younger sister, now married in boys, wrote that her husband had taken fever, their money was thin, and she was expecting another child before winter. She did not ask plainly for Miriam to come. Clara had never asked plainly for anything, but every line leaned like a tired body. "If you had worked nearer, perhaps we might see you." The children still remember Aunt Miriam's molasses cakes. "I hate to say I am frightened, but I am." Miriam read the letter twice in the pantry, where the air smelled of flour and dried sage. Ezra found her there. "Bad news?" She folded the letter. "Family news. Same thing sometimes. My sister needs help." He leaned against the doorframe. "Where?" "Boys." "When would you go?" Miriam looked at the flour barrel, the shelves she had scrubbed, the sacks labeled in her hand. "I did not say I would." "You want to." "She has a husband. Sounds like she needs a sister." Miriam hated him a little for hearing so clearly. That night, she packed her trunk halfway, not because she had decided, but because indecision required something for the hands to do. She folded 2 dresses, her mother's Bible, a sewing roll, and a small purse where she kept 4 months of wages. The room she slept in had once stored linens. Now it held a narrow bed, a washstand, a peg for her shawl, and a curtain she had hemmed herself. Small claims, dangerous claims. A knock came. She closed the trunk. Yes. Ezra stood in the hall. His face looked older in lamplight. Caleb says stage leaves Tuesday. So it does. You were going to tell me. When I knew there was something to tell. His eyes dropped to the trunk. Looks like knowing. Miriam's throat tightened. My sister is frightened. I can send money. She needs hands, not charity. I can send both. She shook her head. You cannot mend every need with wages. No. His voice roughened. But I can try before you walk out without letting me. Miriam looked away. There it was, the midpoint she would remember all her life, though no one there would have called it such. A narrow room, a half-packed trunk, a man too proud to beg and too frightened to command, a woman caught between the family that had formed her and the home that had begun, quietly, to ask for her. I am not Rose, she said. Ezra flinched. The words had come sharper than she meant, but they were true and needed. I cannot stay here as a ghost's replacement, Miriam continued. I cannot be useful until I disappear behind what you lost. I cannot keep a house warm if one room must always remain winter. He stood very still. I never thought you were Rose. No, but sometimes you are angry that I live where she died. He closed his eyes. In the silence, a night bird called beyond the yard. The lamp flame leaned, then steadied. When Ezra spoke, his voice was low. I am angry you live. Miriam's hand rested on the trunk lid. He opened his eyes. I'm afraid if you do, you'll leave. It said less than it meant. It said everything. Miriam breathed around the ache in her chest. People do leave, I said, and some are sent away before they can choose. He stepped into the room, only one pace, then chose with the door open. She did not understand until the next morning. After breakfast, Ezra unlocked the closed bedroom. He did it without announcement. Miriam was kneading dough when she heard the key turn. Caleb stopped outside with an armful of wood. Tom froze with 2 eggs in his cap dial. The whole house seemed to listen. Ezra stood in the doorway for a long time. Then he opened the curtains. Dust rose golden in the light. Miriam came to the hall, but did not enter. The room smelled stale, trapped in years. A woman's comb lay on the bureau. A dress hung from a peg. The bed was neatly made, quilt smooth, pillow untouched. Ezra picked up the comb. His hands shook. Rose would hate this, he said. Miriam said nothing. She liked windows open, said sorrow was worse in a room with no air. He laughed once, softly, painfully. I shut everyone. Then he turned to Miriam. Will you help me clean it? Not pack it away, not erase it, clean it. Miriam stepped across the threshold. They worked all morning. Ezra carried dresses to a trunk, pausing over each as if asking forgiveness. Miriam shook curtains in the yard and washed the windows. Tom beat the rug over the fence. Caleb repaired a loose drawer pull. They found letters tied with ribbon, a dried rose between Bible pages, tiny knitted socks in a box. Ezra held the socks a long while, then placed them gently in the cradle when Caleb brought it down from the loft. By evening, the room was clean. The bed had fresh linen. The window stood open. The blue shawl was folded at the foot instead of abandoned on a chair. Miriam did not leave Tuesday. She wrote Clara instead, sending money and promising to come before snowfall if needed. Ezra added bills of his own without making show of it. Miriam found them only when she opened the envelope again to seal it. She looked at him across the kitchen table. That is too much. It is money. It is yours. He shrugged. Hadley says I owe half the valley. Might as well disappoint him by giving some away. She almost smiled. My sister will know. Then tell her the ranch paid for future molasses cakes. Miriam sealed the envelope. Trust, she learned, did not arrive like lightning. It accumulated like flour in a bin, cup by cup, until one day hunger had less power. But outside pressure does not stop simply because a house begins to heal. In August, the bank note came due. Ezra had known it was coming. Caleb had known. Even Tom, with a boy's sharp ears, had sensed the tightness around money. Cattle prices had dipped the year before. Winter had taken calves. Repairs cost more than grief allowed for. For 2 years, Ezra had let accounts slide, paying what had to be paid and ignoring what could wait. Banks did not grieve. They counted. Mr. Silas Brandt came from Eagle Bend in a black buggy with polished wheels and a smile that did not reach his eyes. He wore a brown suit too fine for ranch dust and carried papers in a leather case. Mr. Hadley came with him, pretending business elsewhere, though the road ended at Carver's yard. Miriam saw them from the garden and wiped her hands on her apron. Ezra came from the barn, Caleb behind him. Brandt removed his hat. Mr. Carver, I regret coming unannounced. No, you don't. Brandt smiled thinner. The bank requires settlement or transfer of collateral by the 1st of September. Cattle sale is in 3 weeks. Your note matures before then. You know the cattle stand good? No numbers on paper. Hadley shifted near the buggy. A man can't run on reputation forever. Miriam stepped out of the garden. Ezra did not look at her, but his shoulders stiffened. Go inside. No. Brandt's gaze flicked to her. Miss Lawson, this is private business. Then conduct it without spectators who came to enjoy it. Hadley reddened. Now see here. Ezra's voice cut low. She's right. Say your piece and leave. Brent opened the case. There is an interested buyer for the lower meadow parcel. That sale would satisfy a portion. Caleb swore softly. The lower meadow held the creek, the best grazing, and the old cottonwoods where Rose had wanted a picnic table built. Without it, the ranch would limp. Ezra's face went blank. Miriam had seen that blankness before. It was not calm. It was a man stepping away from himself to survive a blow. How much? He asked. Brent named a sum that was insult and trap together. Miriam spoke before caution could stop her. That land is worth 3 times that. Brent blinked. And you appraise land now? I read account books. I know water makes value, and I know men offer low when they smell grief. Silence struck the yard. Ezra turned his head, eyes sharp with warning, something like wonder. Hadley sneered. A hired woman's got a bold mouth. Ezra moved so fast the old dog barked. He stepped between Hadley and Miriam, not touching the storekeeper, but close enough that Hadley stumbled back. You will not speak to her that way on my land. Brandt lifted a calming hand. No need for temper. Ezra looked at him. There's every need. Miriam placed one hand on Ezra's sleeve, not to restrain him, to remind him he was not alone. He felt it. She knew because he drew one breath and did not step closer to Hadley. Brent closed the leather case. September 1st, Mr. Carver. They left in dust. That evening the ranch felt fragile again. The repaired fence, the garden, the clean curtains, none of it could stop a banknote. Miriam sat at the kitchen table with Ezra's account books open. Ezra paced. Caleb leaned against the sink. Tom listened from the stove, though no one had invited him. We can sell the north herd early, Caleb said. Price will be poor, Ezra replied. Better than losing the meadow. Miriam turned a page. What about the timber stand on the east ridge? Ezra stopped pacing. No, you could sell selective cutting rights. No, why? Because Rose is buried there. Miriam's hand stilled. Ezra's wife had not been buried in the churchyard then. Of course not. He would have kept her near. I did not know, she said. No reason you should. Caleb looked at the floor. Miriam closed the book halfway. Then we find another way. Ezra gave a tired laugh. You say that like ways grow in the garden. Some do. Over the next week, Miriam turned every corner of the ranch into arithmetic. Eggs to town. Butter when the cow freshened. Beans canned for winter meant less stored at. Old tack cleaned and sold. a stack of unused window glass from the shed traded to Doc Hensley for credit. Caleb found 3 strays bearing carver marks in a neighbor's drawer. Tom trapped rabbits and sold pelts. Ezra rode longer, worked harder, spoke less, but he did not turn mean. That mattered. One night, Miriam woke to thunder. Rain hammered the roof, and wind drove water hard against the windows. She rose to check the kitchen fire and found Ezra at the table, the baby quilt spread before him, the yellow and white one. His hands rested on either side of it. "I was going to sell the silver buckle," he said. Miriam tied her robe tighter. "The one from Rose's bridal," he nodded. "You do not have to." "Don't I?" "No." He looked up. "I let this place rot because I thought keeping sorrow untouched was loyalty. Now the bills come due, and everything living has to pay for what I wouldn't face." Miriam sat across from him. Rain ran in crooked lines down the dark window. Ezra touched the quilt. "I loved them so poorly after they died." "You loved them the only way you could bear." "That ain't absolution." "No. It is a place to begin." He looked at her for a long time. "You always make mercy sound like work." "It is." His mouth softened. Thunder roared away over the mountains. Then a shout came from outside. Caleb's voice. "Ezra, creeks rising." They ran. The lower meadow lay black under storm. Lightning tore the sky open, showing the creek swollen beyond its banks, water clawing at the footbridge and pushing debris hard against the posts. The cattle in the near pasture bunched against the fence, bawling, the younger ones panicking toward the wash where floodwater cut a new channel. Ezra swung into motion. "Caleb, open the west gate." "Tom, lanterns." "Miriam, stay at the house." She was already pulling on boots. "No, this ain't garden work." "No, it is ranch work." He stared at her through the rain, then jerked his head once. "Then stay where I can see you." They worked in wild darkness. Caleb and Ezra rode into the pasture to turn cattle from the wash. Tom held a lantern at the gate, face pale but determined. Miriam stood knee-deep in mud, waving a feed sack tied to a pole, driving bawling calves toward higher ground. Rain flattened her hair and filled her sleeves. Once a calf slipped and went down near the new channel. Miriam plunged after it without thinking. The mud sucked at her boots. Water struck her thighs. She grabbed the calf's slick neck rope and pulled. It bawled, eyes rolling. "Miriam!" Ezra's horse splashed toward her. He swung down, seized the rope, and together they dragged the calf out. The bank crumbled beneath Miriam's heel. She slipped, and for one blind second water took her weight. Ezra caught her arm, not her sleeve, her arm. His grip hurt. It saved her. He pulled her against him so hard the breath left her. His face was inches from hers, rain running down both of them. "Do not," he said, "only that. Do not leave. Do not vanish. Do not become another memory in water and mud." Miriam gripped his coat. "I am here." The storm took 2 sections of fence and the footbridge, but not the herd. By dawn, the ranch stood battered and breathing. Everyone was soaked, bruised, and shaking with exhaustion. Tom fell asleep at the table with his head on folded arms. Caleb drank coffee with both hands around the cup. Ezra stood at the window watching the creek. Miriam put a blanket around his shoulders. He did not shrug it off. The flood changed the bank problem. It damaged the lower meadow enough that Brant's buyer withdrew the offer, which should have been relief, except the note remained due and repairs now demanded money too. Ezra said little, but Miriam saw the old temptation returning, the desire to close every door and call loneliness strength. 2 days before September 1st, he rode to town alone. Miriam found out from Caleb, who looked guilty enough to confess before she asked. "He took the buckle," Caleb said. Miriam's hands went cold. "Rose's bridal?" Caleb nodded, said it might fetch enough from a collector. "Silverwork's fine." Miriam untied her apron. "Hitch the wagon." Miriam, now. She rode to Eagle Bend with Tom beside her, because Caleb had to tend a lame horse and because Tom refused to be left. Dust rose behind them in the late summer heat. Miriam's ankle ached where she had twisted it weeks before, but she pressed her boot hard to the wagon floor and said nothing. They reached town as Ezra came out of Hadley's store. Hadley stood behind him holding the red bridle. Miriam stopped the wagon in the street. Ezra saw her and froze. Hadley smiled like a man watching a play turn in his favor. "Miss Lawson, come to a praise tack too." Miriam climbed down. Ezra's face darkened. "You shouldn't be here. Neither should that bridle." His jaw tightened. "It's mine to sell." "Yes." That stopped him more than argument would have. Miriam stepped closer, lowering her voice. "It is yours, your grief, your memory, your sacrifice to choose. But do not sell it to a man who will hang it in a window just to prove you were brought low." Ezra looked back at Hadley. Hadley's smile faltered. "I offered fair," the storekeeper said. "No," Miriam replied. "You offered hunger with a price tag." People had begun to gather. Mrs. Bell came out of the milliner's. Brant crossed from the bank steps. Doc Hensley paused near his buggy. Ezra looked at the bridle in Hadley's hands. The red leather shone, freshly oiled. Miriam knew Ezra had done that before bringing it in. Even in surrender, he had honored it. Brant approached. "Mr. Carver, if this public scene concerns tomorrow's note." "It does," Miriam said. Ezra turned. Miriam, but she had already opened her reticule. She removed Clara's returned letter, then another paper folded inside it. Her sister had written back with gratitude and news that her husband had recovered enough to work. Enclosed, by miracle and pride, was a bank draft for part of what Ezra had sent, along with a note saying, "Tell the ranch I am not so poor. I cannot repay kindness." It was not, but Miriam had more. She held out her own purse, 4 months' wages minus small needs, money earned from mending in town, from eggs, from butter, from doing without ribbon, new shoes, and every comfort she had convinced herself she did not need. Ezra stared at it. "No," he said. "Yes, I want take your wages. You paid them for work. The work is saving the ranch. That is not your debt." Miriam's voice trembled then, but did not break. "This is my home too, if you have courage enough to let it be." The street went quiet. Ezra looked as if she had struck him through the heart. Brant cleared his throat. "Even with contributions the amount." Doc Hensley stepped forward. "I'll Carver for 2 winter beefs. He never charged me after my wife took sick." Ezra turned sharply. "Dorsey." The old doctor removed his spectacles. "You did. Don't argue in front of ladies." Caleb had ridden in behind them, hat dusty, face set. "I'll take half wages till the cattle sale." Tom jumped from the wagon. "Me too. You barely earn half wages now," Caleb muttered. "I'll take quarter then." A few men chuckled softly. Mrs. Bell, to Miriam's astonishment, stepped down from the boardwalk. Her cheeks were pink. "Rose gave my Annie her wedding dress lace when we could not afford trim. I have not spoken kindly since she passed." She opened a small beaded purse. "It is not much." Hadley looked disgusted. Sentiment on Serunos. Brant, however, was counting. Bankers respected numbers, even when they came wrapped in shame, memory, and kitchen savings. Ezra stood in the center of it all, the mad rancher with mud on his boots, grief in his eyes, and half the town watching him choose whether pride mattered more than land, memory, and the woman before him. He looked at Miriam. "You'd spend your leaving money on my debt?" Her answer was quiet. "I am not leaving today." The words moved through him. She saw it. Ezra turned to Hadley. "Give me the bridle." Hadley held it back. "We made a bargain." "No, you made an offer." Ezra took the bridle from him. His hand closed around the silver buckle, and this time it did not look like a chain. It looked like something he could carry. He faced Brant. "Write the extension. Cattle sale clears the rest. Brent glanced at the money, the gathered townspeople, the doctor, Miriam. 30 days. 45, Miriam said. Brent blinked. Ezra looked down at her. She lifted her chin. The bridge is out. Cattle cannot be moved proper until repaired. 30 days makes failure likely and proves bad faith. 45 makes repayment possible. Doc Hensley coughed to hide a smile. Brent studied her. Then Ezra. 45? Hadley muttered something foul. Ezra stepped toward him, not in rage, in command. You will apologize to Miss Lawson. Hadley barked a laugh. For what? For speaking to her as if dignity is owned by those behind counters. The street held still. Hadley looked around and saw no rescue. Even Mrs. Bell looked at him coldly now. He swallowed. Miss Lawson, I spoke poorly. Miriam nodded once. See that you improve. Tom grinned. Ezra turned away before anyone could see his mouth soften. That night, the ranch kitchen filled beyond its usual measure. Caleb ate at the table. Tom sat beside him. Doc Hensley stayed after bringing liniment for the lame horse, and Mrs. Bell sent a pie by her daughter with a note written stiffly but sincerely. Ezra placed Rose's red bridle on a high peg in the clean tack room, not hidden, not worshipped, simply kept. After supper, Miriam found him in the parlor. The window was open. Sweet peas climbed in pale blooms beneath it. The blue shawl lay folded over the chair. On the mantel, Rose's tintype had been turned toward the room. Ezra stood before it. I thought loving you meant betraying her, he said. Miriam's heart went still. He did not turn. Then today I stood there with that bridle in my hand and heard you say home, and all I could think was that Rose would have called me a fool for taking so long to open the door. Miriam moved no closer. Ezra, he looked at her then. His eyes were wet, though no tears fell. I'm not whole, he said. No one is. I have anger in me still. I know I will likely speak wrong some mornings. I expect I will answer wrong. That almost smile came and stayed longer. He crossed the room slowly. I cannot offer an easy life. I have never had one. I would not know where to set it. He looked at her hands, then her face. I can offer work shared, coffee kept warm, a roof mended before it leaks, a name defended, a room with windows open. And if you'll have it, Miriam Lawson, I can offer my heart as it is, scarred, late, and trying. She let the silence stand long enough to be honest. Then she placed her hand in his. I do not need unscarred, she said. I need true. He bowed his head over their joined hands. His lips touched her knuckles, gentle as a promise he feared to bruise. They were married after the cattle sale, when the note had been paid down and the bridge rebuilt strong enough for wagons. It was not a grand wedding. Miriam wore her brown dress with new lace at the collar, sent by Mrs. Bell with no mention of old unkindness. Ezra wore his black coat and the look of a man walking into weather willingly. Caleb stood beside him. Tom carried the rings and dropped one, then turned red as a beet while the whole church pretended not to smile. Afterward, there was food in the carver yard. Tables made from planks and saw horses held beans, pies, fried chicken, biscuits, pickles, and jars of late flowers. The hens complained from their coop at the crowd. The old dog slept beneath the porch where children tried to feed him crusts. Someone played a fiddle near the barn. The gray mare watched from the corral, ears forward, as if approving the noise. Doc Hensley raised a cup to the Carver Ranch. May it never again confuse quiet with peace. Ezra looked at Miriam. She squeezed his hand under the table. In the months that followed, the house changed in ways a passerby might not understand. Curtains moved in clean wind. The garden gave beans enough for winter. The woodpile rose high before first snow. The fence along the lower meadow stood straight, new posts dark against frost. In the kitchen, 2 cups sat near the stove each morning instead of one. Coffee waited. Bread cooled beneath a cloth. Ezra's coat hung by the door beside Miriam's shawl. The once closed room became a guest room, and sometimes, When Clara visited with her children, little bodies slept there under quilts, while the mountain wind pressed cold hands to the windows. The cradle remained in the parlor corner, not as a shrine, not as a wound everyone stepped around. Miriam lined it with folded blankets and kept mending there. Later, when Tom carved a small wooden horse and set it inside as a joke, Ezra looked at it for a long time, then left it there. Grief did not leave the Carver ranch. Grief rarely packs a trunk and departs like a satisfied guest, but it changed its seat. It no longer sat at the head of the table demanding every plate. It moved nearer the window where light could touch it. It made room for laughter, for tired arguments over fence wire, for Miriam's humming at the stove, for Ezra's low voice, gentling horses in the corral. And if you had passed that Idaho ranch on a winter evening in 1890, you might have seen smoke lifting steady from the chimney, lamplight warm in the kitchen glass, and a man once called mad carrying in wood before his wife asked. You might have seen Miriam Lawson Carver at the table, spectacles low, counting seed packets for spring, while Ezra poured coffee. You might have seen the red bridle hanging clean in the tack room, the blue shawl folded over a chair, sweet peas sleeping beneath snow, and every repaired board holding fast against the wind. Some folks still whispered, because some folks would rather keep an old story than admit a new one has begun. But inside that house, anger no longer had the loudest voice. The loudest thing was the kettle beginning to sing, the soft scrape of a chair drawn close, and Ezra saying Miriam's name like a man who had finally learned that love was not the end of grief. It was the hand that helped carry it home.